The limits of my language mean the limits of my world. Ludwig Wittgenstein. This is a quote that has stuck with me for the better part of probably about a year now. And it got me thinking about how we use language and how it determines how we interact with our life, and are we actually creating the reality that we want to, or that we would ideally like to be in. And a lot of times when we have certain problems, the real barrier isn't necessarily the problem itself, because we've dealt with all the other problems up to this point in our life. So why can't we deal with this one? Or what's making this one such a big deal? And it really comes down to the language that we are using to describe it. So the words that we use shape our perspective and our worldview, and they influence how we feel about ourselves and about our circumstances that we are in. So our beliefs, a lot of times, most of the time, unconscious, are framed by this language. And so this means that our reality is constructed through the words that we are choosing to use. And so when you pay attention to the words that you use, you're tuning into a deeper frequency or a vibration. And so if you've done any sort of research on YouTube in terms of like law of attraction, manifestation, spirituality, whatever it is, you'll have probably came across this concept of vibration. And so the vibration through these words, or the way that you're going about your day to day, connects you with the reality that you are trying to create, or that you want to ideally be in. And so when you think about the world and reality, it doesn't get caught up in specifics, like the super hyper specific detail of what it is that you want or don't want. It just responds to the vibe that you're giving off and that you're emitting. So as I've been going through this, my own personal development process, I started to ask the question, how can I harness language in a way that solves problems and unlocks new opportunities for me to continue to improve and potentially make my life exactly the way that I want it to be? And so it's really came down to 4 specific areas of language that I think is the best foundation to start in terms of how you play these language games and how you are able to orient yourself through using your words relative to everything else outside of you. So the first one was just watching what I label. So when we label ourselves like I am anxious or I'm stressed, we're not just describing like a momentary feeling. We are unconsciously defining our identity or who we are. And these labels that seem harmless can seep into every aspect of how we think and how we behave. And so the problem is once you adopt a label, you start to see the world through the lens of that label. And so your brain starts to look for more evidence to confirm that that is fact. Because out of everything we want as humans, we want to be congruent. We want the things that are in our head to be matched by the external world, regardless of whether that works in our favor or against what we want. So you're not just experiencing anxiety if you're saying I am anxious or I have anxiety. You become that anxiety. That anxiety becomes a part of your core identity. And that, whenever you go on social media and people are posting, the memes about, haha, I'm anxious, so I just dope myself up with 600 milligrams of caffeine at one time to suffer through the pain. Yeah, it's funny because it's relatable, but at the same time, you are reaffirming, hey, me being anxious, that's what I am to the world. And so what we have to start doing is we have to start changing those labels, and it's super simple and super easy to do. So it's not about denying the fact that you're anxious, or it's not about, trying to get away from it. But what it is about is redefining that feeling from being permanent to temporary. And so adding things like for now or yet opens up the possibility for change. And it shows your brain and your mind, hey, this isn't necessarily resolved yet, but it will be. So rather than saying I am anxious, you can say I am anxious for now. So all of a sudden, that feeling has an expiration date. And it allows room for growth and movement through those feelings to get to the other side of ultimately what it is that you are wanting to feel. Now, a lot of times people are going to ask, well, what should I feel? And this brings me to the point of shoulds. So have you ever caught yourself thinking, I should be further along in this journey than I am right now? Or this should be easier. These shoulds are the silent traps that we set for ourselves, which is what leads us to a lot of frustration and self-doubt. So when we live in a world of should, we create a gap between where we are and where we think we ought to be. And that gap is the breeding ground for anxiety, and it's where all the uncertainty lies. But if you take any sort of critical thought of life, it's all uncertainty. The only thing we have is right now, and by focusing on should, you are just reaffirming that there is a gap and an unknown that you don't know, and your mind is having a really hard time of dealing with that, right? So instead of should, we need to start to reframe those statements. So I should be further along can become, what can I learn from where I am right now? Because all that we have is the present. Time doesn't exist except for right now. So this subtle shift releases that internal struggle and turns it into an opportunity of reflection and growth. So let go of the shoulds, because all they're doing is creating friction, and they're filling your mind with things that are completely irrelevant, because most of the time the things that you are thinking that might happen or should happen don't ever actually happen, right? So all that you can really do is just figure out, what do I need to learn from where I am right now, and how quickly can I apply those lessons to get me out of this? And so the next point, whenever it comes to language, is you want to get specific. So in asking questions or looking for answers, vague questions lead to vague answers. So if you ask yourself, why can't I lose weight? You'll probably end up with a list of reasons that leave you feeling even more stuck. Because whenever I ask, whenever I ask, why can't I lose weight? You're going to come up with a lot of reasons. My hormones are out of whack. I'm not moving enough. I'm not eating healthy. I'm not going to the gym. I'm not drinking enough water, whatever it is. But when you ask a specific question, you trigger your brain to start to search for more targeted, actionable solutions. So instead of, why can't I lose weight? Or how do I lose weight? Imagine saying, what are 3 habits? Imagine saying, what 3 habits can I change today to improve my health? Now your brain is going to start working on concrete steps that you can actually take, whether that's stopping certain things or starting new things. Specificity sharpens focus. It's like a magnifying glass. If you think about a magnifying glass in the sun, the more energy gets put into it, which means fire, or in this case, actual progress. So and this doesn't even necessarily apply for personal goals, but this also applies for professional goals, right? In terms of your career or whatever it is you're doing there. When you ask your team or your colleagues or your peers, whatever, for specifics, you not only create clarity for yourself in what you are asking, but also empowers others to give you actionable results or to actually start to solve the problem. Because when things are vague, there's an endless amount of possibilities. But when things are specific, there are very hyper-focused possibilities. And usually that takes care of a lot of the anxiety that comes from, because when you ask your team or colleagues or peers or whatever for specifics, you not only create clarity for yourself, but you create clarity for the other people that you are trying to work with, which is a breeding ground for actual results. And the last thing that's important when it comes to language is understanding what your definitions are or what other people's definitions of things are. So whenever it comes to communication, it goes beyond just the words that we speak. It requires a deeper understanding of the meaning behind those words, or the words that you're telling yourself. So how often do you assume that you know what someone else means only to find yourself in a conflict later on? And it's usually because there were 2 different definitions to the same word. But because that clarity was not made, all of a sudden, there's conflict. And it's easy to forget that everyone interprets language through the lens of their own personal experience, beliefs, and emotions. However, next time when you're having a conversation with yourself or someone else, whether it's personal or professional, just try asking something along the lines of, when you say X word, what do you mean by that? Or can you define what anxiety means to you? How are you describing that thing? Because anxiety to one person could be just a standard feeling of stress, while for another, it's a catastrophic event that's going on in their mind. And understanding their emotional level and where they're at is key to effective communication and being able to actually be truly empathetic and understand people, but also understanding yourself. Because when you start to get reflections of what other people are feeling, you can start to put that into your mind and figure out how you need to piece your own internal world together. And you'll be amazed by how much clarity just doing that means, and understanding how you are defining certain words and communicating those things with others. And so by aligning on definitions, you eliminate that risk of misinterpretation and foster stronger, more meaningful relationships. And so if you take anything away from this, I hope that you have just started to chew on this idea of language and how important it is to understand how it affects your everyday life, because the language that we use determines the limits or the lack of limits that you choose to set on yourself. So, till next time, peace.